Today I'm here with my good friend Chris Harrington. Chris is honestly one of the most amazing people that I've met before. He's so successful in business. He has so many philanthropic adventures that he's into in so many different areas. And it's funny because we've joked now about how I'm your hype person, but he knows that I mean every word that I say. I wanted him to come on this podcast a couple different times, and I had to keep reaching out because I know he's so busy.
Sorry.
But no, don't be sorry. But he truly is incredible. And sometimes I think we tend, well, at least myself, we tend to think that people who are successful and have this great marriage and family and children and everything, that they must have had things just kind of handed to them. But Chris is going to share his story that will blow your mind because he does not come from an easy background. And this just says so much about his character, that he learned how to get himself out of that situation, become the man that he is. So I'm so thankful that you're here today.
Well, I'm going to use you as my hype person from now on. That was an amazing introduction. So
I mean it. I mean every word.
No, that's very kind. If I were to talk just kind of about like history, my mom and dad were married. I have an older brother. He's 3 years older than I am. And then I was born in 1969, and I have an Irish twin who was born in July of 1970, so 15 months apart, right? As soon as she was pregnant with my younger brother, my mom and dad divorced. So we were living in California. We moved to Arizona to live with her family. And then when my little brother was born, my father came to visit to meet him. And he said, hey, can I take Ken, who's my older brother, can I take him out for a soda? And he never came back.
Oh, that is my worst nightmare.
Yeah, not a kind thing. My mom had a really rough childhood, right? I mean, much rougher than mine, if I'm being fair. And she was an addict at the time, and so he convinced her. He's like, look, you got to sign this saying these kids are not mine. You're never entitled to child support. And my mom just signed it away. Just said, okay, we're good. And so and I think the next time I saw my dad, I saw him when I was 5. I woke up Christmas morning and he was there. And then he was gone, and I think I saw him again. I went to live with him when I was 8.
So you didn't even know him when you went to go live with him then?
No, and so my older brother and I, we swapped places when I was 8. And I went and lived with him for about 9 months maybe. So I went from we were living in Page, Arizona, squalid conditions on welfare.
Oh, I know Page, Arizona. I'm from Arizona, by the way.
There you go. Okay, yeah, so we were living in Page at the time, living in a trailer. My little brother and I are sleeping on the floor because we don't have beds. And we would sleep in front of one of those space heaters. And I go from there to living with my father in Oregon. It was like 101 acres on the mountain.
Oh, wow.
And it was just shocking, right?
Yeah.
The first night I was there, we had steak. I never had steak in my life. I'm 8 years old. And I choke on it because I don't know.
You have to chew it over and over.
I don't know how to eat steak. And so it just, but I was so worried about my mom because prior to that, we'd spent a couple of years in foster care because my mom, she was, because of the addiction stuff, we just kept outrunning the law, right? So, for some reason we were in southern Utah, and someone had told us that the government's coming to get us the next day. So her brother came, packed us up overnight, moved from Utah to Arizona, so they couldn't, because when the Department of Child Protective Services come, it's a state-right thing. So Utah couldn't impact us in Arizona. So we just moved across the border to Arizona, outran them, moved to Wyoming, and that's where they caught us, was in Wyoming. And then I think we did my foster care time, about 2 years. We were in South Dakota for that.
Wow.
Multiple, I think 4 homes. So my mom was just addicted, not just addicted to drugs and alcohol, but addicted to men. So she'd marry some men that were pretty rough. We just bounced around a lot,
And were they rough to you?
They were. It was. These men were, inconsequential to me now, but back then, they were pretty rough. He married a couple of people while they were still in jail, like literally in their orange.
Oh my gosh.
There was just such an addiction. So every time we would move, we were chasing a man. We were moving wherever they were going, or we were outrunning the law. So had 18 schools before I went to high school. And I ended up in a really small town for high school, a place called Kanab. I graduated with a class of like 38 kids.
Wow.
And
Kanab is beautiful, but it's wonderful. In the middle of nowhere.
Middle of nowhere. But it was one of those, I think it's one of the times that it honestly, it saved my life, right? It was, going from when we moved from Phoenix, a really rough neighborhood.
Yeah.
At the time to Kanab, and I'm walking into, like, I'm going from like violence all day long, having to, really running home from school,
Yeah.
like to Kanab, Utah, where it's like, what are we gonna do? Well, let's drag Maine. Right? It was like very simple, and I think it saved my life. So yeah.
Wow.
So I can pull on any one of those threads, but that's kind of if you look at it. That's where we're at. My younger brother now lives in Oregon or lives in Alaska. My older brother, I don't know where he lives. I'm not sure. I've got a couple half brothers. I've met one. I've been introduced to two of them. I meet them like I was introduced to them when I was 40.
Yeah.
And then I've got 3 half sisters that I also met like 1994, 95. And I haven't seen them since then. I've just met them. Like they called me one day. Hey, is this Chris Harrington? Is your dad named Ken? I'm like, yeah. Like, hey, where are your sisters? I was like, I don't have sisters.
Oh, yeah.
So I met them once, and we just talk on social media. I don't really know any of them. So the saying is, don't let the family you came from impact the family you're in now. And so I focus all my energy on home and my kids now and my wife.
And that's the thing. I've actually seen you in action as a father, and you're incredible. You're this incredible father, and I've seen how you are to your wife too, and you're an incredible husband.
Well, thank you. And again, let's be fair. That there's, they talk about how when you're marrying somebody, you're marrying their childhood,
Yeah.
right? And so those things are always there.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And as you know from they create little fractures and facets about you
Sure.
that complicate you as a human. And understanding them is really empowering. So
Yeah.
knowing how you react and what triggers you, et cetera, and how things from your childhood are impacting your relationship.
How does someone find that out?
You got to go to therapy. You got to dive deep into it. You've got to.
I agree with that.
And that there's something about the human condition, at least in my experience, where we don't like to be honest with ourselves.
Yeah.
I don't know, because
Yeah.
that brutal, blatant honesty is painful.
Yeah, it is.
And so it takes, in my opinion, a professional to break down some of those walls.
Yeah.
And call you out, because if it's your spouse, that's too protective. That's too.
Yeah.
They don't
want to upset you.
Well, and you get into a defensive thing, and it's like, you need I think you need a professional, in my opinion.
Totally.
Yeah.
So we were talking about this right before it started. Like, I told you I served an LDS mission in the East Coast in some really rough areas. It was Spanish speaking, and I just saw things that I had never seen before, and I was not raised sheltered at all. And I think about them all the time. Even this morning as I was getting ready, I was thinking, like, this is exactly why I want Chris on here, because I want people to know that there's hope, that no matter where you come from, that there's hope. I mean, you're this successful businessman, successful father and husband. So how does someone there's therapy, but how does someone pull themselves out of that? Like, if you were talking to someone who's in the slums, what would you say to them? What would you do?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And we talked about this briefly before we started, but I think part of the challenge you've got is that the system itself, right? Whether or not it's statistics or history or your guidance counselor, patterns of other people's lives, they tell you that you're stuck there, right?
Yeah.
You come from a divorced family, you're going to be divorced. You come from an addiction family, you're going to be addicted. And so the problem is you're fighting against things that as a child or even as an adult, like, there's so many feedback loops that are, in my opinion, completely irrelevant, right?
Yeah.
Like, those statistics don't matter. And so, whenever I'm doing, Big Brother kind of thing, or if I'm, working, talking to other kids in foster care, et cetera, the thing I always say is, like, you're not your parents' past.
Yeah, no.
You're not, right? You didn't choose this environment. You didn't choose to be here, right? The choices you make now are the things that are going to change the direction of your life.
Which is so empowering.
But but the problem is when this, and look, I've said this before, but, like, it doesn't matter where I live now. For some reason, I still feel like I'm one bad move away from being in a trailer.
Yeah.
and buying milk with food stamps.
Yeah.
That's how fascinating the mind is, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
those things have just been beaten into you. And so understanding...
Scarcity mentality.
Right, but understand that also it empowers me to go, hey, man, it's not who I am. I'm not that person anymore. I'm
Yeah.
not that, And so when I'm talking to these kids, and if I'm talking to someone in your mission, I'd say the same things. Like, you're not that. You're right. Your past, your parents' choices, your grandparents' choices, your siblings' choices, whatever they are, those aren't yours.
Yeah.
Right? You're in control of what you do, what you feed your mind with, and what you're willing to accept in your life. You're in control of that.
Yeah.
And so regardless of what statistics are telling you or your people are telling you, pull out of it. There's that whole crab boiling in a pot where the crabs will just keep pulling you back down. Sometimes families like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and I actually saw a quote yesterday, I don't know what it was, some Instagram meme or something like that, that talked about sometimes breaking away from family is the most difficult thing because while they want you to be successful, they want you to break out of it, they also will be the ones telling you you're going to be an addict.
Like, I know who you are.
Right, and I know you better because I'm you, right?
Yeah.
You got to just think for yourself.
Yeah.
You got to empower yourself.
Think for yourself, and you're so full of compassion all the time. Like, just from talking to you so many times before, and just from seeing all the stuff that you do to help so many people, you just have the biggest heart. You said something right before we started that all of us are of worth. I just wish everyone knew that you matter just as much as I do, and no matter where you come from, I wish I would have known that. We talked about how my past was not as extreme as yours,
Sure.
but there was serious instability in my upbringing and stuff, and I wish there would have been like a mentor or someone that would have told me, like, you have a choice and your choices matter. And Sean said, my husband says this all the time, like, being in the victim mentality is so hurtful to yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, just know, even if you have legitimately been a victim, you're not. Just, get up and get going, and your choices will change your life. They matter. And sorry, I'm all over the map, but
No, I love it.
I truly, I love you being all over the map.
Yeah.
I truly believe, from my own personal belief, is that we're all God's children and that God loves us all equally, that none of us are better than someone else. And I wish people knew that they matter, that they are of worth, and that they're not just, being thrown about by the wind. Like, they can change things for themselves.
I love it.
But that's why you're such a good example of this. So, okay, tell me the time in your life that things started to change when you realized, wait, I can actually do something big.
Yeah. Growing up, I had an aunt that, for whatever reason, the responsibility of my mom landed on her. So she was the one buying food. She bought 100% of my school clothes every year, and she wasn't wealthy. She was working in a lumber yard, but she made sure that we were always taken care of. And I remember, because she was poor and we were poor, like for whatever reason, there became a time where I saw shoes as being the thing that drove me and motivated me. I wanted to be rich enough. This is how fragile my mind was. But I'm like, one day I want to be rich enough that if I want to buy a pair of shoes, I can just do it, right? And that kind of became, like, for lack of a better corny phrase, it became my North Star, right? And I was just always driven by being able to eventually be there. So that was a big motivation for me. But there were three men that came into my life that I believe really drove it. When you get out of foster care, you're given a social worker, right? A caseworker.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about it is while you're in foster care, even though as a child, I'm 8 years old when I come out.
Yeah.
You know the game, right? I know the questions he's going to ask me. I know the answers I'm going to give. He knows the questions he's going to ask. He knows the answers I'm going to give. And it's a game that you play because I don't want to go back into foster care. So I'm going to answer the questions the way that I need to stay home with my mom. So
Even as a little child, you knew this?
Well, because my mom,
sad.
because I was my mom's protector. So I was worried if I wasn't there, if I'm back in foster care, who's taking care of her? Who's stopping her from, cutting her wrist or, and so So I knew the game, but I got a new therapist, brand new, right out of college, and he didn't know the rules. Right? So I've been there. It's like my third or fourth visit, and I meet a new caseworker, and he's asking me questions others aren't asking me. He's like, Chris, why do you stutter? I don't know. Because I stuttered nonstop. It was just a protective thing. I felt dumb, and so a way to control that was I would slow my speech down to a stutter so that I didn't have to talk. Right? Fascinating. And so what this man took his job with me in such a serious way, right? His whole objective was like, well, you don't need to stutter. You don't have a condition. You're not dumb. You're actually really intelligent. Like, you're bright. And he also really educated me on drugs. Whereas meaning, Chris, drugs will ruin your life. Look around you. Look at your family. Look at the people that you live with. We live in apartments where there were 3 or 4 families in an apartment, in a 2-bedroom apartment. All the kids just sleeping on the floor. Like we'd live in situations like that. And he goes, if you do drugs, I can promise you that's where you're going to be, right? So that was one man. I had another man when I was living in southern Utah. One of my good friends, his name was Andy Compass. His parents were wise. They go, Andy, Chris's family situation's not exactly the model we want, right? And so he goes, I want you to hang out with Chris, but I want you to do it here at our home, right? They didn't, where they could have just said, hey, you know what?
Don't hang out with him.
His mom's an addict. He's, at the time my father was in prison. It's like, maybe this isn't the best for you. But they said, meet here. And so his father's name was Charlie Compass, and he was amazing, right? So you think, while I grew up with so many stepfathers and men in my life, none of them loved me. One did. And my mom wouldn't quit drinking, and he's like, I got to leave. And so, but all the rest of her husbands, the rest of her boyfriends, none of them cared about me. This man cared about me, right? And so to have, probably I was 14 years old, and to have a man tell you that you're valuable and that you matter as a I may be 14, but I was still a 4-year-old boy, in a weird way, was really empowering. And he just taught me that, you're not your past. You are going to, your future is endless. You can do whatever you want. I believe in you. I believe in you. Something that simple. So that was the second man. He's an amazing man. And the third man was my high school guidance counselor. And he motivated me in a completely different way. He sat down with me, I think it was my junior year, and he's like, what do you want to be when you grow up? I said, I want to be a lawyer. He took his glasses off, and he's like, Chris, I see construction in your future. I was like, why? Well, thank you. He goes, look, your mom, at the time my mom was a bartender. He goes, your mom's a bartender, your dad's in prison. There's a lot of money in construction. You can eventually become a supervisor. You'd probably make $20 an hour. Now, what he didn't know is that I was already a welder. I was already making $17 an hour.
You're like, that's what I'm shooting for?
As a 16-year-old, And it created a motivation in me to prove him wrong. And so
sad he said that.
Well, but what's so funny is that, and again, I've had years to deal with this, right? Because this is, what is this, 30-something years, 38 years ago, or something like that. But it's was he wrong? Was he wrong? Right? What if he had said, I love it? What if he hadn't lit that fire under me that said, I'm going to prove you wrong? You know what I mean? And pointing me from a dysfunctional world into a functional occupation where I could pay my bills and not be on welfare. And so again, I don't call him for advice, but he helped redirect me in a way that really empowered me, because it created a drive. No, look, he was right. I'm a lawyer, so I didn't.
I think you're doing fine though.
Yeah, but those are the three men that came into my life that really changed the trajectory and just it flipped a switch for me. And then I served an LDS mission in British Columbia. Okay. I spent about a year of that in the office, and so I got to see the business side of that, and I learned, and from that, I mean, that created a foundation that I used, and I still use the business mind that I had there. I still use that throughout everything that I do. So that was pivotal as well. So yeah.
Gosh. Okay. So then tell me, just kind of the end, tell me about like when you first started having success, like what that looked like and how that happened. Yeah.
So I left when I graduated from high school. I went from Kanab to Cedar City, another small town, for those that don't know, to go to college. I didn't have a welding job that I could do there. I didn't have like any. I couldn't do construction. And
you're like, there's farmland out there.
So I took a job as a telemarketer. There was a call center down there, and I had a knack for it pretty quick. Right, I was able to get in there, and I was able to sell it. All of a sudden, I'm going, I have to shower 3 times after work. Like I'm wearing a shirt and tie to work. Like it was really kind of empowering because for the first time, I could also control my income in a way. I could sell more and get commissions.
Yeah, get more.
And so I realized then, like, wow, this sales thing is kind of powerful, right? Like if you're gonna do something that allows you to earn more money, you should do that. So that's where it started, and then then I went on my mission. I came back, did some more time in Cedar City, moved up, and I started running the entire call center. So,
oh wow!
And then while I was running the call center up, I moved up here to Salt Lake. When I was running that call center, one of our clients was DirecTV. They wanted to hire me, move me to LA, and so all of a sudden, I'm sitting here. This is 1994. So one of my 24, 25 years old. I'm like, I'm being recruited to leave the state. I'm like, this is amazing. So moved my young family to LA, did the DirecTV thing for a while. And again, it was success, but it wasn't like windfall success, right? So I did that, realized LA is not a great place to raise a young family, moved back to Utah. And I took a job with a company in New York, but I traveled back and forth. So my young family would stay here in Utah. I would travel every week back and forth for the whole week to New York. And then what had happened in 2002, I got recruited. A recruiter randomly called me, asked me for one of my colleagues' phone numbers. And for whatever reason, I got connected to Josh James at Omniture. And so he and I started interviewing. We danced for probably 4 months before we ended up, finding a match and marrying each other. But I joined Omniture. They were a 6-year-old company. They were doing $3.5 million in revenue, and I took them from that to $509 million through an IPO.
That's so crazy.
And we were acquired by Adobe for $1.8 billion. I did a 2-year earn-out with Adobe, and yeah. So it was But what and going back to one of your previous questions, if I were talking to and I do this all the time when I'm talking to foster care kids or whatever, like I didn't just land here, right? Each one of these things are building things, and so
key.
And they have to think about where they want to go. That's their North Star.
Yeah, you have to have a North Star.
And then they've got to figure out a path to get there. And these things are building blocks, and it's education, and it's the people you surround yourself with, and making sure that you're not, like, do you have people that are pushing you? Do you have people that are better than you? And that's a harsh thing to think about. But if if it's true that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, and these people are bringing your average down, being critical in the way you think. Yeah. Is it sounds harsh, but they have to do that. Yeah. They have to find somebody and model themselves from on somebody that is doing something more. But it is a building block. I didn't just land at an IPO. Right. It took years and years of work and poor decisions and good decisions and mistakes and lessons and all those things. So.
When you were this little 8-year-old boy sleeping on a floor of a trailer, would you have imagined your life the way it is now?
No. And it's like I said a little while ago, even now, there are times where I imagine my life back in the trailer. It's just that you know, that programming is so deep in there. You know, I eventually thought, I thought I'd be a supervisor, you know, because I knew I had a knack for leadership, because I did some leadership stuff in school, et cetera. Like, I knew I had a knack for that a little bit. But if I were to think about where I would be, it would have been like a supervisor, probably working in a logging company or something like that. But able to take care of my family, and just, you know, it's what I saw as a man, because men weren't there to provide for us. I saw that as being my only thing. Like as a father, my job is to make sure that there is food on the table, that there's clothes on your back, there's a roof over your head. And so, you know, I look at my relationship with my older children. That's where my focus was, 100%. I was on work. I was gone a ton, you know, and that has consequences too, right? And so now it's fortunate that I have a second chance with a young heart, right? Because you've got, let's see, 23 to 4. There's a 19-year age gap between my youngest and Hart. But I understand those consequences. Hart's unique because of autism, but, you know, I'm not focused exclusively on the dollar. I am focused on what am I building? What am I, you know, in terms of humans. There's a lot of mistakes made along the way, for sure. Yeah.
But you're a great father, husband, and person. You just are. And I've had this thought in my head over and over. I just wish I could just scoop up that little version of you, and these children that are suffering. And anyway, you've inspired me so much to be that example to someone, and never tell a child that you're only gonna amount to this. Never. Be that example to these children. Yeah. And side note, last thing I actually want to talk about is you have so many foundations. You're always helping people and always promoting things, but you and Angie have kind of been specifically focusing a lot on Hart and his autism, and you guys have been promoting a foundation for this. Do you mind just sharing just a couple of seconds about that?
Yeah, for sure. So our son was diagnosed with autism a year ago this month, actually, Tuesday before Thanksgiving of last year. And, you know, we were caught a little bit flat-footed. What do we do? Where do you go? Who do you talk to? What help do you get? And we were introduced to Utah Valley University's Wolverines Elevated program, which was a program that was started by Keith and Melissa Nelson, who created the Center for Autism there on UVU. And they've created a program, and we secured a government grant 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, to help provide children that have intellectual disabilities with an advanced opportunity for college education. So they take students that age out of the regular school system, and for students with these intellectual disabilities, that's at the age of 21. Wow. And they take them and they'll put them into a program at UVU where you have a student mentor that follows you, but they take regular everyday college classes. Wow. They're able to earn a certificate, a degree. And what this creates for them is and we had an event that your husband attended last week at our home, or 2 weeks ago at our home, and one of the young ladies who's in the program, she's into her third year now. She was speaking, and she said the thing she said that was most powerful. She said, "It created an environment where I can now advocate for myself."
Wow!
Right? And it's little things like that I don't think we understand. And to be fair, it's easy to be sheltered, because until Hart had autism, I didn't know anything about it. Yeah. I had a friend that had an autistic son, and I would help support what I could in terms of donations and things like that, but I didn't really understand it. But as soon as it happens, you ask all those questions. Is he going to live with us forever? Is he going to go to school? Is he going to get married? Is he going to have a family? Is he going to have a job? Right? Those are all the things all these families deal with this. And so being able to provide an environment where these children, these individuals, can become advocates for themselves, it gives them hope. And hope's hope's the thing that separates us from all the other animals.
You know what? And that's a great place to end it, because the thing, ever since I met you, the thing that you just exude is hope for so many reasons. And you're always looking out for ways to help people and to brighten their lives. And you've been such an example to me, and I know you will continue to be to so many people. So thank you so much for sharing all